Hi, warm welcome. You're watching the Super Saturday Debate. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. The United States has launched a large-scale military strike against Venezuela, targeting multiple locations, including the capital Caracas. Explosions and low-lying flying aircraft were reported in several areas, causing panic, power outages, and a heavy military presence. Now, President Trump has announced on social media that the strike was successful and claimed that Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife were captured, even flown out of the country. The US President said the operation was conducted in conjunction with US law enforcement. This marks a historic escalation in US-Venezuela relations. Remember, it comes after months of US pressure on Maduro's government, including previous anti-drug operations and strikes on suspected smuggling targets. But remember, the abduction of Maduro, a grave violation of international law, also sets a dangerous precedent for the world. Even more so after its military interventions in countries like Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan and Syria. What gives US the right to intervene? And should India be concerned, given that till only yesterday a group of American lawmakers have written to India's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Vinay Quatra? What was their demand? A bail for Omar Khalid and a fair, timely trial in accordance with international law. This is the very man who's been accused of the 2020 Delhi riots. So what right does US have to intervene on the incarceration of Omar Khalid? This when the matter is already under consideration before India's top court. Is this not disregard for India's democratic institutions, that too by a key strategic ally? Talk about human rights violations and democratic shortcomings. The US has imprisoned journalists like Julian Assange for long periods simply for exposing truths, demonstrating a blatant disregard for press freedom. If this is not a regime change at gunpoint, then what is the question we'll be taking with our guests.
There was 3 attacks in 3 strategic areas in Venezuela. Those are key strategic locations where the military forces have infrastructure.
Desconocemos el paradero del presidente Nicolás Maduro y de la primera dama Cilia Flores.
Para lo cual estamos ya levantando la información.
Let me introduce my guests tonight. I'm joined in by Sushant Sareen, who's a senior fellow at ORF, also joined in by Professor Andrew A. Latham, who's the international relations expert. Many thanks to you, gentlemen, for joining in. Professor Latham, if I could come to you first to begin with, what's your assessment of this? Countries like Brazil, Russia, all have stood in unison condemning this. They've not only called it a grave violation of international law, but they've also said that the world needs to stand in unison to condemn this act, one which has also been labeled as an act of abduction. I'd like your thoughts first.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon. It's not surprising that states, national governments, are making sounds in defense of national sovereignty and the right to non-interference in the internal affairs, their internal affairs. That's enshrined in the United Nations Charter. It's enshrined in customary international law. It's a foundation, a bedrock, if you like, of this international order. But it's interesting, too, to watch the reactions of the common people in the streets of many of these countries, some of whom are diasporic Venezuelans, but many of whom are not, who are celebrating the demise of this dictator, Maduro. So in terms of reactions around the world, it's important, I think, to balance those two. And a third element of balance there would be the ultimate and utter hypocrisy of countries like Russia and Iran to make noises about non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries when that's what they do on a daily basis. That is not to excuse the United States. There are constitutional issues within the U.S. around the War Powers Act and Article 2 of the Constitution. Did the president have the right, the legal right to do this under the American Constitution? There's also the enforcement of law. Maduro has been indicted in the Southern District of New York for corruption and narco trafficking. It's being framed by some people in the U.S. as the equivalent of the police kicking in the door and arresting a suspect at gunpoint. That might work in the United States. It's not going to work globally. And then under international law, this is blatantly and obviously and incontrovertibly illegal. It would require the use of force requires self-defense under Article 51. This is not self-defense, or a United Nations Security Council mandate, and no such thing exists in this respect. So this is a violation of international law, and that is going to undermine American soft power on the globe. Even its friends are going to look at this and shake their heads and say, you really shouldn't have done this.
So, Shareen, even though Maduro is going to be now tried on charges of narco-terrorism in New York, do you think it is just to do with narco-terrorism, given that in their own national security strategy, the United States has clearly referred to how Venezuela happens to be of key interest, vital interest to the United States because of its vast oil reserves. There's also the strategic geopolitical location of Venezuela. Not to forget, you're also looking at what it promises in terms of trade routes, given that it's located, in fact, it's got a pivotal location when you look at the entire Caribbean route, especially given the interest that the US president has also shown in Panama Canal and its proximity with Panama.
Akansha, let me ask you one thing. If the Americans had said that we are now going to take out Maduro and effect a regime change or invade or bombard Venezuela because we need their oil, because of economic reasons, because that oil and that location is pivotal to our interests, how do you think that would have played out? It plays out much better by giving a dog a bad name, accuse him of narcotics trafficking, being a cartel, etc., and then take him out. Exactly what they did with Noriega, although in the case of Noriega of Panama, there were reasons to believe that he was indulging in all kinds of shady activities, including money laundering and narcotics trafficking, or at least giving sanctuary to drug traffickers. On the Venezuela side, that case hasn't really been built out in a manner that is compelling. So clearly you have to, slap these kind of charges on him so that you can justify an unjustifiable action. That is one. The second is, look, you can do whatever verbal gymnastics you want to do around the legality of this move, whether international law allows it, does not allow it. The simple fact of the matter, and this is a question you asked in your introduction, Akansha, by what right did the Americans do it? It's very simple. They had the power to do it, and that gave them the right to do it. It is a naked exercise of American power, their military superiority, their military power, and the message is that we can do it, and we can do it because, and we are doing it because we can do it and we can get away with it. Pure and simple. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, you want to put whatever embellishment you want to put on it, you can put on it. The message which goes across, and yes, there is hypocrisy everywhere. The same countries that went apoplectic when the Russians invaded Ukraine are today keeping a very studied silence. You see the statement from the EU, it makes you laugh. And you have to then start, realizing that why the EU has lulled itself into irrelevance globally. I can understand they are close allies of the Americans. So yes, they are going to keep quiet about it. I think from the Indian side, given the fact that we never said anything to Russia, I don't see we have any legs to stand on to criticize what the Americans have done. You and I can do it. We are individuals. We are not attached to the government. But as far as the government of India is concerned, we don't have a dog in this fight, just as we didn't have a dog in the fight of Russia and Ukraine. And if tomorrow the Venezuelans were to start selling us oil, I'm sure we'll buy oil from Venezuela if they're giving it to
Well,
us cheap.
Venezuela already is in touch with India, and our own cornerstone of this bilateral relationship is heavily, in fact, revolving around crude oil.
No, that is true, but I think the Venezuela is right, although it's potentially one of the biggest oil producers. But right now, its production capabilities have come down significantly because of the kind of sanctions that have been imposed on
True.
Venezuela. There are not many buyers.
True.
But I think India can, if at all that particular supply chain opens up.
That's a very critical point that you've just now raised about, say, dependency on oil, and in fact, gunning for all of those countries that are involved with oil trade, which is why I also want to bring in Professor Latham over there. Professor, your thoughts on first India being targeted because of its trade with Russia when it comes to oil trade. Look at the way Venezuela is being targeted at the moment. Also, to quickly again refer to what the National Security Strategy that was published in November last year states. It's also talking about non-hemispheric players in, say, the South American mainland, namely Iran. You're looking at Cuba, you're looking at Russia, you're looking at China. What does it speak of the United States and its own hunger for being the country to be defining the existing global order?
Well, my first response to your question was about the legality, and I would put that very much on the back burner, as my co-panelist has. This is about geopolitics and grand strategy. This is about the way this administration, but reflecting a tectonic shift in the American body politic, to mix metaphors. This is not the post-Cold War era, the unipolar moment, the end of history when the United States got to make all the rules and enforce all the rules, and everybody else, including China, had to tag along. Those days are over. This is an era of multipolar, great power competition. And this administration has said, we are going to play that game and we're going to secure our natural, in quotation marks, our natural sphere of influence, which is the Western Hemisphere. That's why we have all the bloviating about Greenland. That's why we have all the noise about excluding Russia, China, and Iran, extra hemispheric players from the Western Hemisphere. What's their biggest foothold? Well, they have two. One is Cuba and one is Venezuela. And Venezuela is the first domino to fall, to invoke a very old metaphor in American foreign policy circles. It's not an invasion. It's interesting that this is it was January 3rd, 1989, that the United States invaded Nicaragua to depose its narco dictator. I'm not sure if that was on the mind of anybody in the White House, but that's a reality. This is similar to that, except there's no ground invasion.
And Professor, let's not forget that the US president has already said that they will be deciding who gets to govern Venezuela, and that's a big sweeping statement.
Yeah, and I think, he can say all he wants. At this point in the vacuum, which of course nature and politics both abhor, there's going to be people moving in to take that. It'll be the military on the one hand, the establishment, the existing regime, minus the top guy. But let's not forget Mrs. Machado, who won the Nobel Prize for Peace. And the people that she represents, the average Venezuelans, really have no time for this.
But will she be able to command the military like the way Maduro was?
Well, no. Obviously not. Will she be able to mobilize the people? Maybe. That remains to be seen. My point is that just because Donald Trump signs a document or gets on air and says whatever he says doesn't mean it's going to happen. It doesn't even mean it's American policy. That's not the point I wanted to pivot to. Was what's the next domino? Cuba, which is completely dependent on, well, not completely, but more than 50% dependent on cheap submarket price Venezuelan oil. It is now, and not to mention the political diplomatic relations between the two, it is now even more isolated. It's now even in a deeper economic crisis. And the question on my mind is, if Venezuela is the first domino to fall, will Donald Trump push for the second domino to fall? And that, I think, that's a scary proposition. That would be widely supported by many people in Latin America and beyond, but it would be absolutely opposed by governments, including friendly governments around the world, that, as my co-panelist pointed out, are really not eager to see the United States doing what it can, when it can, simply because it can.
So, Shansarin, as Professor Andrew has just now highlighted that Cuba could be the second domino, do you think that it's just Cuba, or let's also go by the recent interactions that have taken place between, say, the Israeli Prime Minister and the US President. The leader of opposition in Israel, Yair Lapid, has just now taken to X saying that the regime in Iran should be watching out very closely the developments in Venezuela. Could this also have a bearing on Iran, given that the national security strategy has also spoken about the Iranian presence and how the US believes Iran is giving launch pads to Hezbollah out of Venezuela?
Look, the Americans could open up another front in Iran, but how are they going to be able to do it? It's one thing to bomb Iranian nuclear sites. It's another thing to carry out certain other operations inside Iran, including assassination operations. But to effect a regime change, do they have the wherewithal to do it? Now, it is entirely possible that the regime in Iran might fall because of its own contradictions and its own problems, including very severe economic ones. That is entirely possible. But if the Americans were to intervene, how are they going to do it? Are they going to put boots on the ground? And that same thing holds true for Venezuela. Yes, you've removed the top guy, as Professor Latham says. But how are you going to ensure that there is now going to be a transition to a government or a regime that you favor? How are you going to manage that? Are you now going to pit Venezuela into a kind of a civil war of the sorts we have seen in multiple countries in the Middle East? Because when the Americans go about bringing democracy and liberal values and all kinds of other newfangled notions or old-fangled notions, they actually make a hash of it. Over 1 million people died in Syria, in Libya, in many of the other countries in the Middle East, which have become ungovernable. There are civil wars raging all over the place. Are you wanting to pit Iran in a situation like that? Will you be able to do it? Do you have the wherewithal? Do you have the political capital? Do you have the resources and the instruments to be able to carry that out in Iran? And as well as in Venezuela, are you going to put boots on the ground in Venezuela? Will there be a fight back in Venezuela? There are just too many unanswered questions. So it's one thing, and I think it's a pretty spectacular operation. Whether you like it or you don't like it, and you think it was American bullying of the worst kind, it was a spectacular operation that the Americans carried out. Make no mistake on that.
Dragged out of the bedroom in the dead of the night, the Venezuelan president and his wife. But Professor Latham, as democratic countries and as far as India is concerned, as one of the largest democracies in the world, do you think it is time for India also to step up, given that you never know when this intervention may come and bite us as well? We speak a day after we were just discussing that letter marked to the Indian ambassador to the United States by these US lawmakers who've asked for a speedy trial and a timely bail for Omar Khalid, one of the Delhi riots accused of 2020.
I think Indians need not worry about an armed kinetic intervention on the part of the United States. That's not on. The frictions, the turbulence that's been experienced since the tariff business started are anomalies in an otherwise very tight relationship. Demographically, the Indian diaspora in the US, two democracies, imperfect but very much democracies, and both are looking to hem China in the Indo-Pacific region. So there's some natural convergence of interest, which means that India is not the Venezuela of South Asia. Having said that, a few caveats or footnotes. First of all, those 8 lawmakers plus the mayor of New York City were way outside their wheelhouse legally, normatively, diplomatically, and prudently. They had nothing to say, because the last time I checked, Mamdani is the mayor of New York City. That's a full-time job, and he should be fully invested in that, not catering to a minority constituency, which is an important part of his base. So that they weren't speaking on behalf of the United States government, they were speaking on behalf of themselves.
All right. Quick closing thoughts to Sushant Sareen. My apologies, Professor, running short of time. Sushant Sareen, we speak at a time when we've seen enough military interventions by the United States. What does it speak when the United States speaks on, say, the incarceration of an Omar Khalid?
Nothing. I think we should stop tilting at the windmills. There are all kinds of people in India who say all kinds of things about the US, about China, about other countries. There are people in opposition who will
But our
taunt.
lawmakers are not penning letters to their House of Representatives or say.
Maybe we don't pen letters because probably people in the Congress party and others also want to go visit the United States. And if they were to start penning letters, they might not be given the visas. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
Okay, there
But
you
you know,
score a
all
point.
raucous democracies, we people will say certain things. You need to have a bit of a thick skin that they've said something, yes, to the extent that there are. I don't think you should respond to the mayor of New York. What the hell? Are you going to start responding to the mayor of Indore writing to the president of the United States? No, he's not. Or the mayor of Bombay or even the mayor of Delhi. I don't even know the name of the mayor of Delhi. I don't know why Mamdani has been made into such a big deal. How does it matter to my life? What he can ruin New York as much as he wants to. How do I care what he does to New York?
No, but
But
it's
I
also
don't
the selective opposition that's coming from him, given his Indian roots.
Arey yaar, what is his, has he ever acknowledged his Indian roots? You know, we also have this stupid habit of trying to embrace everybody, even when they shun us. We were embracing Kamala Harris. Did she ever say that she's Indian? She always associated herself with the black community in the United States. She never associated herself with India.
Then, going by that logic, he has no right to speak on the Indian Prime Minister or accuse him of human rights violations.
By that logic, Akansha, you and I have no right to speak on what happens in the United States. We are in a democracy. We are people, opinionated people, the Americans as much as we are.
Okay.
And we say certain things. But what the hell? Either you make us into a North Korea and say that you can't say anything against these 10 people or these 10 countries. I'm sorry, I don't think we are like that. And just because some American says something does not mean we have to respond to
All
it or
right.
react.
Thank you for playing the bigger person over here. Let's hope that this regime change, in fact, is just a reminder for all democracies now to unite and perhaps also call out the kind of treatment that's being meted out to heads of states. But as Professor Andrew also said, that perhaps it could just be the beginning of a domino effect. Is Cuba going to be next? Is Iran going to be next? We'll have to wait and watch. But many thanks to the gentlemen for joining in on the discussion. Shifting focus over to the domestic shores, over to Indore. The death toll in the contaminated water supply incident in the city has risen to 15, sparking outrage and demands for accountability. Despite the gravity of the situation, the government's response has been limited to issuing a show cause notice to officials of the Indore Municipal Authority. Many are questioning whether such a response is sufficient for what appears to be a case of criminal negligence. The fact that officials have not been booked for culpable homicide has added to the public's frustration. The incident has, of course, raised serious concerns about the safety and maintenance of the city's water supply system. The government's priorities are being questioned, with many demanding swift and stringent action against those responsible. CNN News 18's Anvit Srivastav brings you ground reports.
We are in Bhagirathpura area of Indore, exactly standing where that pipeline was that used to supply potable water to thousands of residents of this area, and where exactly sewer water was being mixed into it. However, you can see it is all covered in mud pile because it has been rectified. We are being told last night and yesterday evening this pipeline was mended, and now the water supply has been restored. However, amidst furor and outrage over last 1 week, this action was taken by the administration. Heavy action has also been taken on senior officials, including Municipal Corporation Commissioner Dilip Kumar Yadav, Corporation's Additional Commissioner Rohit Sisonia, and also in charge of the Superintendent Engineer Sanjeev Srivastava. But despite that, even though a detailed survey has been ordered of water network pipelines, question remains whether that mammoth task will be efficiently undertaken. We'll like to show that this is the exactly white building is the washroom where this water sewerage leakage was there. Beyond this, you can see there is a residential area, and this water pipeline supplies potable water to all these residents of this area, and right next to it is the water tank. You can see this is the water tank where water is stored, and all the water, potable water that is stored in this water tank runs down through the pipes, and this is the pipeline that runs straight into this residential area. And this washroom in between was mixing sewer water because the pipeline was broken. It has now been mended, but major questions that remain, and people, when we met those who have been affected and who have lost their loved ones, they have serious questions to ask the government. The question is, who is responsible for the red tapeism that actions were not being taken for months? They've also asked that locals had complained of contaminated water, but no action was taken. Rupees 2 lakh compensation is also, they say, is very meager. And what about those who lost their sole bread winners? लता जी, आप आपकी रिलेटिव थी गीता भी,
भाभी मेरी
जी, क्या हुआ था और 26 को क्या हुआ कि आप लोगों को एडमिट करना पड़ा?
इनको है ना रात में बहुत पेट दर्द हुआ, उल्टी दस्त लगे, तो इनने रात में बताया नहीं और वो बोलते भी नहीं बना। फिर सवेरे बताया कि मेरे को चैन नहीं पड़ रही, तो फिर उनको लेके गए, मतलब बेहोश ही थी। जब थोड़ा बहुत होश आया ना तब उनने बताया कि मैं ना ऐसी परेशान हो रही हूँ। तो फिर हम जल्दी आए, बाई में एडमिट करा इनको, 4 दिन वहाँ भर्ती रही और थोड़ा पेट में आराम पड़ा तो छुट्टी करा ली। लेकिन है ना 2 दिन बाद वापस उनको प्रॉब्लम वही शुरू हो गया। फिर वहाँ अरबिंदो ले गए हम, पर अरबिंदो में भी और तबीयत खराब हो गई। इलाज तो चला लेकिन नहीं आराम पड़ा उनको। बोल रहे थे उसके कारण ना पूरा इन्फेक्शन फैल गया पानी से।
अच्छा,
हाँ, उनने भी बोला था
ये
डॉक्टर
सब पीने की पानी की वजह
पीने के पानी से हुआ है सब।
और जैसे पिछले 1 हफ्ते से आपने बताया कि भर्ती हुई, फिर घर आ गई, फिर घर की, तो परिवार में भी काफी दिक्कतें रही।
हाँ,
कैसा रहा पूरा पिछला
नहीं नहीं, हम देखने आए ना तो हमारी भी तबीयत खराब हो गई। मेरे बच्चे दोनों, उनको भी दस्त उल्टी लग गए थे। हमको नहीं पता था कि जब पानी से ही हो रहा है ये, तो हम अभी भी हमारे पेट में दर्द हो रहा है उस चीज से। हाँ, और हमारी लड़की और उसके बच्चे तीनों, वो भी, उनको भी यही हाल हो रहा, अच्छे हो जा रहे फिर हो रहा है ऐसे ही। मतलब हमारे घर में कम 12-13 जने ऐसे हो गए। हाँ,
तो इलाज इनका चला, लेकिन फायदा आप बता रहे कि नहीं हुआ?
नहीं हुआ फायदा। इलाज तो चला लेकिन नहीं हुआ।
यशोदा जी, 27 तारीख को क्या हुआ था, कैसे तबीयत बिगड़ी जीवनलाल जी की?
रात को तबीयत बिगड़ी उनकी, तो दस्त लगे, पहले तो खूब दस्त लगे। तो मैंने थोड़ा पानी ककूना करके पिलाया, मन के ककूना पी लो, तो उनने आधा गिलास पानी पिया। ने फिर दस्त होने लगे तो मैंने गोली दी, उससे भी आराम नहीं पड़ा उनको। सुबह फिर मैं दवाखाने दूसरे दिन ले गई उसी दिन, तो उनको कुछ असर ही नहीं हुआ दवा गोली का। और फिर रात को वो तो ज्यादा ही ज्यादा होने लगे ना, दे उल्टी 3 बार उल्टी करी ना। सुबह 7 बजे 7:30 बजे तो चलते बने वो भैया, कुछ बोल ही नहीं पाए मेरे से। तो वो
बहुत कम समय में सब कुछ हो गया।
हाँ,
एक दिन
बहुत
पहले
कम समय में ही हो गया भैया। समय ही नहीं मिला दवाखाने ले जाने का, हमको तो मौका ही नहीं मिला कि ले जाएं इनको।
और इस बीच कोई प्रशासन से मदद, जब से ये हुआ उसके बाद से काफी दिन हो गए,
कोई मदद नहीं आई, ना कोई झांकने भी नहीं आया, ना कोई नेता साहब आए, ना कोई कलेक्टर साहब आए, कोई भी नहीं आए।